The crunch of leaves underfoot was almost comforting as I made my way back to the cabin. I'd spent hours out there tracking whatever moved, but not a single shot had been fired. It was as if the forest was mocking me, withholding its game, playing coy. The sun had dipped below the tree line, and shadows stretched long and dark across the ground, each one more sinister than the last. Finally, I reached the cabin. My boots scraped against the porch, and I pushed the door open, the familiar creak echoing through the empty space. But something felt off. The cabin was just as I'd left it, yet somehow, it wasn't. The air was stale, colder than it should have been. I could swear the furniture was shifted just slightly, and there was an unnatural stillness inside, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. I locked the door behind me and shrugged off my pack, setting it down by the firewood pile. The silence was thick, suffocating, pressing down on me from all sides. It was only broken by the occasional crack of the old wooden walls as they settled around me, groaning like a sleeping giant. I checked my phone. No signal, as expected. The isolation was part of the appeal, but tonight it felt more like a trap. I tried to shake off the creeping unease, convincing myself it was just the fatigue. As I prepared a simple meal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned to the window, peering out into the pitch-black forest. Only shadows and darkness met my gaze, but the prickling on the back of my neck told me I wasn't alone. The night crawled on, each minute dragging slower than the last. Eventually, I dozed off in the armchair, rifle by my side, until a sharp knock snapped me awake. My heart leapt into my throat as I jolted upright. The knock came again, louder this time, as if something was trying to get in. I grabbed my rifle and moved toward the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. I threw it open, only to be greeted by the empty woods. But as I scanned the area, a movement caught my eye. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at me from the edge of the trees, vanishing as quickly as they'd appeared. I slammed the door shut, chest heaving as I tried to steady my breathing. I bolted the door and backed away, feeling the walls closing in around me. I could still feel those eyes on me, even through the walls, watching, waiting. The rest of the night was a blur of restless pacing and constant vigilance. I could hear them, footsteps circling the cabin, low growls that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, scratching at the windows. Every time I looked, there was nothing there, but I knew they were just beyond my sight, lurking in the darkness. At dawn, the noises stopped and a strained silence settled over the woods. I ventured outside, rifle at the ready, scanning the perimeter for any sign of what had stalked me through the night. There were no tracks, no disturbances in the underbrush, but I knew what I had seen. And then I noticed it. A claw mark on the cabin door, deep and fresh, as if something had been toying with me, just inches from tearing me apart. The mark was unlike any animal I'd ever encountered in these woods. Too large, too twisted. As the morning sun filtered through the trees, I felt the illusion of safety slip over me. But it was thin, fragile. I knew they were out there, biding their time. And the worst part was, I could feel it in my bones. The hunt was only just beginning. The day felt different. Even as the sun rose higher, casting its warm light over the cabin, the shadows seemed to cling stubbornly to the trees, refusing to let go. I couldn't shake the sense that I was still being watched. Whatever it was, it hadn't gone far. It was waiting, lurking, just out of sight. I spent the morning inspecting the cabin, hoping to find some clue, anything that could tell me what I was dealing with. But the only thing I found was that claw mark on the door, stark and jagged, a reminder of what lay beyond the safety of these walls. I tried to convince myself it was just a bear, maybe a mountain lion, though I knew deep down it was neither. I decided to head back into the woods against my better judgment. If there was something out there, I needed to face it on my terms. I packed a few essentials, double-checked my rifle, and set off, determined to find out what was stalking me. The forest was eerily quiet. There were no birds, no rustling leaves, no signs of life at all. As I moved deeper into the trees, I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, an instinctive warning I couldn't ignore. I kept my rifle ready, eyes darting to every shadow, every movement, no matter how small. I could sense something close, something unnatural. Hours passed without a single sign of animal life, and yet I felt like I was being led somewhere. The trail seemed to twist and turn, looping back on itself until I was certain I'd walked in circles. Just as I was about to give up and head back, I saw it. A clearing up ahead, hidden behind a thick stand of trees. I pushed through the underbrush, emerging into a small clearing. In the center stood an old, crumbling stone structure, something I'd never seen before in all my years of hunting these woods. It looked ancient, almost like a shrine covered in moss and half sunken into the earth. But there was something off about it. something that made my skin crawl. I stepped closer, drawn to it against my will, and that's when I noticed the bones. Scattered around the base of the shrine were piles of bones, some animal but others unmistakably human. They were old, yellowed, and brittle, but they told a story of something that had been here long before I arrived. My mind reeled as I took it in, the implications setting my heart racing. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft whisper like wind through the trees, but there was no breeze. I froze, straining to listen. It was a voice, low and guttural, speaking in a language I didn't understand, but its meaning was clear. I wasn't supposed to be here. Suddenly, a rustling sounded behind me. I spun around, rifle raised, but there was nothing there. Then, without warning, something barreled into me from the side, knocking me to the ground. My rifle flew from my hands, and I scrambled to my feet, blood pounding in my ears. There it stood, looming over me. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, a twisted, malformed creature with limbs too long and joints that bent the wrong way. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. The stench of decay hit me, nearly making me retch. It moved faster than I thought possible, lunging at me with a guttural snarl. I dove to the side, barely dodging its grasp, and scrambled for my rifle. My fingers closed around it, and I turned, firing off a shot that echoed through the trees. The creature let out a bone-chilling scream as the bullet struck it, but it barely slowed down. I fired again and again, each shot barely holding it back. Finally, it disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the stench of decay and the echo of its screams. I stood there, shaking, rifle clutched in my hands, knowing that this was far from over. I made my way back to the cabin, each step feeling heavier than the last. I'd seen what was out there, but I knew that creature was just the beginning. Something darker, more terrifying was watching, waiting, hunting. As night began to fall, I bolted the doors and windows, knowing full well that wood and locks wouldn't hold back what was coming for me. But I had no choice. I was alone, and whatever was out there wasn't finished with me yet. Night fell faster than usual, as if the darkness itself had swallowed up the last light of day. The shadows seemed to gather outside the cabin, pooling around the windows and stretching across the floor. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in on me, thick and suffocating. I knew it was out there, somewhere close, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had barricaded every entrance, pushed every piece of furniture against the doors, and loaded my rifle with what little ammunition I had left. But deep down, I knew none of it would stop whatever was hunting me. I paced the cabin, my eyes flickering to the windows every few seconds, expecting to see those yellow eyes staring back at me, dot. The first sound came just after midnight, a faint scratching, like claws on wood. It started low, barely audible, but quickly grew louder, more frantic, as if something was trying to claw its way inside. My heart raced as I pressed my back against the wall, clutching my rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white. I tried to focus, tried to calm my breathing, but the scratching was relentless, coming from every direction at once. And then it stopped. Silence fell, heavy and unnatural, as if the forest itself had gone still. I strained to listen, but there was nothing, just the deafening silence, pressing in on me from all sides. I exhaled, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, but before I could even relax, the silence shattered. The door shook violently, as if something was throwing its full weight against it. I staggered back, raising my rifle, pointing it at the door as it buckled under the strain. The wood creaked, splintering, but somehow held. I could hear something breathing on the other side, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down my spine. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the assault stopped. I stood there, rifle aimed, waiting for the next attack. But instead of another blow to the door, I heard a voice, a low, rasping whisper calling my name. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. The voice slithered through the cracks in the walls, wrapping around me like a cold wind, chilling me to the bone. I backed away from the door, feeling trapped, as if the walls were closing in on me. The voice grew louder, repeating my name over and over, each time more insistent, more desperate. It felt like it was inside my head, clawing at my thoughts, trying to pull me toward the door. And then I saw it. A figure stood outside the window, just beyond the reach of the dim cabin lights. Its shape was barely human, hunched and twisted, with eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. It pressed its face against the glass, and I could see its skin, gray, mottled, rotting. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, revealing rows of teeth, sharp and broken, dripping with black ichor. I raised my rifle and fired, shattering the window and sending shards of glass flying. The creature disappeared, retreating into the shadows, but I knew it wasn't gone. I could still feel its presence, lurking just beyond the broken window, watching, waiting. The silence returned, but I could feel it, pressing against the cabin, testing its walls, searching for a way in. I knew it was only a matter of time before it found one. I backed away from the window, keeping my rifle trained on the darkness outside, but something caught my eye, movement in the corner of the room. I turned, and there it was, inside the cabin. It had somehow slipped through the walls, materialized out of the shadows, standing only a few feet away from me. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and its mouth stretched into that horrifying smile. I fired, but the bullet passed through it, as if it were made of smoke. It lunged at me, and I felt its claws rake across my chest, tearing through flesh and bone. I screamed, the pain searing, blinding, but I fought back, swinging the rifle like a club, trying to push it away. It stumbled back, disappearing into the shadows once more, but I knew it was still there, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. I collapsed to the floor, clutching my chest, blood seeping between my fingers. The pain was unbearable, but I forced myself to stand, knowing I couldn't stay here, couldn't wait for it to finish me off. I stumbled toward the door, throwing it open, and fled into the night, leaving the cabin and whatever nightmare was inside behind. But as I ran through the forest, I realized something horrifying. The woods were no longer familiar. They had changed, twisted into a maze of shadows and mist. Every path led back to the cabin, its windows glowing faintly in the darkness as if calling me back. No matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape. The forest had trapped me, and the hunt was far from over. The forest closed in around me, a suffocating tangle of twisted branches and unnatural silence. No matter how fast I ran, every path seemed to twist back on itself, leading me in circles, always back to that cursed cabin. My chest burned, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. I knew it was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I stumbled over roots, barely catching myself before I fell, and then I saw it, just ahead, through the trees. The cabin, its broken window glinting in the dim light, stood as if it had been waiting for me all along. A chill ran down my spine as I realized there was no escaping it. The woods weren't just keeping me in, they were leading me back. For a moment, I considered trying to find another way out, but I knew it was hopeless. I couldn't keep running in circles forever. I took a deep breath and stepped back toward the cabin, my hands trembling as I pushed open the door. The air inside was thick, stale, laced with the stench of decay. I could almost feel the creature's presence lurking in the corners, watching me with those sickly yellow eyes. I bolted the door behind me, knowing it wouldn't hold, but it was all I could do. I took a shaky step forward, scanning the room for any sign of movement. My rifle was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos of the forest, but I grabbed a fire poker from the hearth, clutching it like a lifeline. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The room was deathly silent. The kind of silence that felt alive, as if it were listening, waiting. My eyes darted around, searching for any hint of movement, but there was nothing. Just shadows and silence, pressing in on me from all sides. And then, without warning, the temperature dropped. My breath hung in the air, a faint mist, and I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I turned slowly, and there it was, standing in the doorway, its twisted form outlined against the darkness. It was closer now, almost close enough to touch, and I could see the decay in its flesh, the rot spreading like a disease. Its eyes met mine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me, freezing me in place. It took a step forward, and I swung the fire poker, but it passed right through, as if the creature were nothing but mist. It reached out, its claws grazing my shoulder, and a searing pain shot through me. I stumbled back, clutching my shoulder, blood seeping between my fingers. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in, and I knew I was running out of time. Desperation took hold. I backed away, tripping over my own feet, and fell to the floor. The creature loomed over me, its twisted smile widening as it crouched down, inches from my face. I could feel its breath, hot and rancid, as it leaned in, whispering in that low, guttural voice. Words I didn't understand, but their meaning was clear. I was trapped, and there was no escape. Then, in a moment of pure instinct, I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the door. I threw it open and plunged into the forest, my feet pounding against the earth as I ran. The trees blurred past, the shadows stretching long and dark, and I could feel the creature behind me, a presence that seemed to seep into my bones. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the clearing. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, and looked up to see something that made my blood run cold. There, standing in the trees, were more of them. Creatures just like the one from the cabin, their eyes glowing in the darkness, watching me with a hungry intensity. I was surrounded, their twisted forms blending into the shadows, waiting for me to make a move. I was the prey now, caught in a trap with no way out. I scrambled to my feet, searching for an opening, but there was none. The creatures began to move closer, closing in from all sides, and I realized that this was it. There would be no escape, no last-minute rescue. The hunt was over, and I was their prize. As they closed in, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a desperate urge to fight, to survive. I grabbed a broken branch from the ground, holding it like a weapon, and braced myself. But deep down, I knew it was pointless. They were too many, too strong, too otherworldly. I stood there, surrounded by shadows and glowing eyes, and waited for the end. And in that final moment, I understood I was never meant to escape. The forest, the cabin, the creatures, they were all part of the hunt. And now, they were claiming their prize. I braced myself, clutching the broken branch as if it could somehow fend off the horrors surrounding me. The creatures closed in, their twisted forms creeping through the shadows, their eyes glowing with a predatory hunger. I took a deep breath, preparing for the worst, when a sudden blinding light burst through the trees. The creatures recoiled, hissing and shrieking as the light washed over them. I shielded my eyes, squinting through the brilliance to see what was happening. The light grew brighter, illuminating the entire clearing, and for the first time I saw the creatures clearly. They were hideous, their twisted bodies writhing in the glare, their skin shriveling as if burned by the purity of the light. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light began to fade, leaving a soft glow in its wake. The creatures had retreated, their shapes dissipating into the shadows until they were gone, leaving nothing but silence and the faint scent of charred earth. I stood there, stunned, barely able to process what had just happened. The forest around me was still and peaceful, as if the nightmare had lifted. I looked around, trying to make sense of it all, when I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. A man, tall and sturdy, with a kind face and an air of calm that put me at ease. He stepped forward, offering me a reassuring smile. "You're safe now," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The creatures won't harm you anymore." I took a shaky breath, the relief washing over me in waves. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, still reeling from the encounter. The man nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "Just a guardian of these woods. I've been watching over this place for a long time, waiting for someone like you to find your way here." He glanced around, as if sensing the remnants of the creatures lurking just beyond sight. "They feed on fear, on those who lose their way. But they're gone now, at least for tonight." I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me, as if the weight of the forest had finally lifted. "Thank you," I whispered, barely able to believe I'd made it out alive. The man nodded again, a slight smile playing at his lips. "There's a path out of here," he said, gesturing to a narrow trail that seemed to appear from nowhere, winding its way through the trees. "Follow it, and it'll take you back to where you belong. And remember, the forest may seem dark, but there's always light if you know where to look." I took a step toward the trail, feeling a surge of hope. I looked back at him, wanting to say something, but he was already gone, vanished into the forest as if he'd never been there. As I made my way along the path, the trees began to thin, the darkness giving way to the first light of dawn. I could hear the birds singing, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, the sounds of life returning to the woods. The terror of the night faded with each step, replaced by a sense of gratitude, a renewed appreciation for the world around me. When I finally emerged from the trees, I found myself back at the edge of the road, the cabin nowhere in sight. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool morning air, and started walking, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The memories of the creatures and the nightmare I'd endured would linger, but I knew I'd been given a second chance. I'd faced the darkness, stared into the heart of fear, and emerged on the other side. And as I made my way home, I knew I'd carry that light with me, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there was always hope.